For 36 years, the name Lotus has roared the roads of the world's greatest racetracks. Only the Italian Ferrari team can rival the British marque's overall racing results. The Lotus Engineering Company was founded by Anthony Colin Bruce Chapman on the 1st of January 1952. That company is still based at Ketteringham Hall, Norfolk. However, the Lotus story really takes two paths, one by Colin Chapman, the other by a Scottish farmer, Jim Clark. The young Scot's first love was the land and what went with the lifestyle. His growing passion, racing cars. And this is how the high-speed Odyssey began.
This Colin Chapman had been building front-engine understeering cars. Now he was building rear-engine neutral steering cars.
From the onset, Colin Chapman's Lotus cars were different. Simple, very fast, but different. Also from the onset, Jim Clark displayed a style that too was very fast, simple, different. Even from the early days of Formula Junior, the Chapman design, partnered with Clark's natural ability, were winners.
By now, Clark was pulling out a considerable advantage, and everyone else scrabbling to keep up with the Scotsman, who was showing just how well and how dominant the Lotus 18 was.
Chapman's creation spread to all forms of the sport. His magic, along with Clark's touch, turned a Ford's Cortina hack into a full-blooded racer.
Here, Clark is seen with the Lotus Cortina, fighting it out with the Galaxies. It took some reeling in the little Cortina, but Clark was just the man for the job.
In Formula One, the two were almost unbeatable. Clark taking 2 World Drivers' titles, as well as a historic Indianapolis 500.
This is one race the crowd will never forget. Clark decides to ride out the last few minutes of the race behind Foyt. The final lap, Clark holds a 31-second lead, almost a lap over the second-place Foyt. The checkered flag.
He went out seriously to win at Indianapolis, and the result was actually almost a foregone conclusion before the start.
Chapman's cars were to win the Manufacturers' Championship on 7 occasions. But to tell the Lotus story in any way, you must understand the Chapman style. If you're a real racing car nut, and I'm one of those, no doubt about that, this is Mecca. This is the early workshops of Lotus, the place that Colin Chapman put all his brilliance together, down on paper, the end result, a car like this one. This is the Lotus 32, a very famous car for those of you who can remember back to the Tasman series in Australia. This car was driven by the late, great Jimmy Clark in 1965. You know, you can just smell the atmosphere here. You look at the old sheds and you can imagine the midnight oil burning, and of course the end product, the Lotus car, the Lotus Classic. It wasn't long before Chapman needed more space. He simply moved up the road a little. His new racing home reflected his absolute style. Ketteringham Manor is still the home of Lotus today, housed in this magnificent 400-year-old castle-style estate, surrounded by hectares upon hectares of beautiful English countryside. This is style with a capital S. Throughout the halls, priceless trophies fill spaces, not cabinets. Grand Prix prizes that reflect the team's successes. The boardroom smells of rich leather and century-old timbers. Colin Chapman's office remains untouched since his untimely death in 1982. A true mark of respect. Outside in the age-old courtyard, carriages once parked waiting to transport the gentry. They're now replaced by huge transporters waiting to take the racers to fight yet another battle. Cobblestones that rattle to the clatter of horses' hooves are now silenced by the muffled sound of racing rubber. Inside the ancient stables, the modern-day horsepower the world responds to. Formula One racing cars. This almost bizarre setting has to be seen to be believed. The legendary Stirling Moss gave Lotus its first Formula One victory way back in 1960 at Monaco. The tiny Lotus put a smile on the established team owners' faces. However, the nimble newcomer, in the hands of the master, simply blew them away.
Stirling Moss and the Lotus win at Monaco, his penultimate Grand Prix win.
Lotus had provided the vehicle for one of Stirling's greatest victories. It also gave him the ride for his last Grand Prix race.
It was a tragic end to a great Formula One career.
A man who has seen much of this, Bob Dance, 27 years at Lotus.
We were fast and fragile. You've got to be, you know, down to what it takes to win, really. That's the main thing, is to win. Now the sport is much more safety conscious. There are lots and lots more regulations, of which there was virtually none.
Over the years, it's almost become folklore, the relationship between Colin Chapman and Jim Clark. How was that relationship? You were around those times.
Very close. And Chapman ran the complete show. He was here most of the time, and he had his finger on the pulse in every department you cared to go into. Once he came in, you know, there was definitely some action about the place. He knew which way he was going, he knew what he wanted to do, and he had that charisma and ability to get the best out of people when they were working for him. Once they'd tired of Chapman's persistent pressure on winning all the time, I don't think this was the place to stay.
An Australian, Peter Collins, now has his foot firmly planted on the company's accelerator these days. Colin Chapman gave the Aussie his first break into Formula One.
This building, although it's not a typical Formula One factory and headquarters, it says everything about Chapman and Lotus. And every day when you walk into the building, even if things are not going well, you feel a surge of spirit, because there's so much around you of what has been achieved. And when you know something of the difficulties that Chapman went through on occasions, it inspires you to overcome any difficulties that you're experiencing yourself at that time.
This sport has always been about money. Whilst most teams live in clinical hospital-type buildings that house some of the world's greatest computer technology, which, by the way, wins Grand Prix races and World Drivers' Championships, Lotus continue their tradition, creating the tubs, floors, body panels, everything down to the finest detail. Collins has brought a new feeling of confidence to Lotus. You can feel it everywhere you go throughout this historic complex. Looking from the outside in, you can't help but feel the Chapman spirit. Clive, it's probably a very unusual question for you to have to answer, but in your mind, what made your dad so special? What gave him the sort of vision that he had?
Well, clearly he was an intelligent man and a visionary, but most of all, he had the ability to realise his dreams and ideas, and he did that with a mixture of his own ability and motivating others to realise their abilities. And as a team, he, along with a lot of other people, had a great adventure and had great victories. And it was that ability to realise what you really want to get hold of. And he did that in spades, I think.
For me to stand here in these garages and look at the county lanes, I could imagine some of the cars like the one we've seen out the front being tested up those lanes. I mean, some of the memories must be fantastic.
Well, certainly Dad's house is, where he used to live, is about a mile away. And occasionally Mum would be out in the garden and hear a Formula One car fire up and worry, you know, if he was in it having a drive around. And you probably saw the photo at Ketteringham Hall of him driving the 49 without a helmet and smiling like a Cheshire cat. And he used to get up some good adventures, yeah.
The romance of it all. Chapman screaming down a country lane in the latest Formula One racer. This little strip of tar that would prove the car ready to take the challenge of the world's toughest tracks. Lotus, on the way back, but in the true Chapman style.